Well, good afternoon and welcome to our April Ranching 101 webinar presented by AgTrust. Today, you will hear from an industry expert and learn more about the importance of cattle genetics. Before we start, please join me for a short message from AgTrust.
When your passion is agriculture and a rural way of life, you need a partner who understands. That partner is AgTrust Farm Credit, formed from two trusted farm credit associations. Our mission is to provide personalized financing tailored for full and part-time farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, and rural homeowners. And because we live in the communities we serve, AgTrust Farm Credit is here to help you succeed.
Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jason Clear, Associate Professor and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Beef Cattle Specialist, will discuss the importance of mastering cattle genetics in a successful operation. With years of experience developing educational programs to enhance the efficiency and profitability of Texas beef producers, Dr. Clear brings invaluable experience in genetic selection and herd improvement. As coordinator of the Texas A&M Beef Cattle Short Course and a respected leader in the beef industry, he has helped thousands of producers optimize their operations. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Clear owns a purebred cattle operation in Madisonville, Texas, giving him firsthand insight into the practical application of genetics in ranching. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the chat box or the Q&A box. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Clear.
Well, thank you very much, Bryn. Let me get shared here. And it's good to be able to visit with everybody this afternoon. And my background and my trading is animal breeding and genetics, and so I guess from my perspective, if you're a PhD, you think you can solve the world's problems just by a little bit of genetic selection, and I do think that there's a lot of opportunities for that, and so. I kind of thought about what I would go through today and whether we kind of focus on basic genetics or what angle we would take. And I just decided, let's kind of get back to the meat and potatoes and let's think about selection for what matters. What are the economically relevant traits and how we can improve the profitability of our operation by doing that selection there. The question I have for producers, right now is, are we at record cattle prices? And everybody's probably nodding their head if they sold cattle here lately, that we are in record cattle prices, and it is great, especially if you're the cow-calf producer. If you're having to buy those cattle, you may not be as much of a smiling face as we are at the cow-calf level on our end, but we are in record cattle prices. With that, the big question is for how long. If you were at convention and looking at the market outlook, it may be a little bit fuzzy yet, and even our economist here at Texas A&M AgriLife, there's some uncertainty of, the question is how long. We would expect prices to drop off as supply increases, but there's so many variables that go into that. But right now, we are experiencing great cattle prices. But then if you look at this a different way, and CattleFax is a great news organization, and as far as a data organization for the cattle industry, they're a valuable asset because they take USDA plus their data and others and look at it and analyze it and try to help us in the production world, predict where we need to be and where we're going from the cattle market or input costs to help us all be more profitable. And one of the things, this was a chart that I pulled from last fall, one of their publications. And if you look at inflation adjusted 2023 inflation adjusted dollars, you can see as we look at these cattle prices for a 550-pound steer, and we come across here, if we look at where we are really now and kind of where we were when we thought cattle prices were the highest that they would ever be. And they were high when we got in after the last drought cycle in 2011 and 2012, and those prices jumped up there. They were record prices at the time, but we're even higher now. But if you look at that, basically adjusted for inflation, we're just a touch lower than we were 10 years ago when we think about those cattle prices. And so I guess the reason I put this up here is to not damper the excitement of the cattle production, but of those of you that keep up with what it costs you to raise a calf today, it's a lot higher. Our input costs are much higher now than they were 10 years ago. And if you just fast forward back 5 years ago, we've seen those increases per calf increase substantially. And so I think that we have to kind of keep that in check that, yeah, we're seeing these record prices, but our input costs have gone up as well. So, we always have to look at both sides. We have to look at the cost side, and we look at the price side of the value of the product we're producing. And I think this kind of shows it that, input costs as well as taking advantage of the current cattle market are extremely important when we're thinking about long-term sustainability. Right now, as if you're trying to rebuild or trying to get into the business and buy females, they're really high right now. Replacement females are extremely high. And so they are costly up front. Fortunately, if you look at some of the most recent CattleFax data, they're showing, right now we're at about 3.5 calves to pay for female, whereas kind of the long-term average is about 4.5 calves with that. Again, some of that's dependent on what our salvage value of the females that we will be dispersing, if you have those. But also looking at, well, what are we projecting as far as cattle prices to be here in the next few years as well. So replacement females are high up front as well. And so we have to kind of keep that in check. Now let's kind of go back to the basics here. When we look at, economic evaluation of cow herd and decisions, I like to try to put this basic model up for the cow-calf producer because I think it's important that as you begin to make changes or decide to do management practices different or implement a management practice into your operation, I mean, you have to kind of look at, well, what are my production inputs? What are the costs associated with that? And then how do these things that we do, whether it be selection or nutrition, any kind of management changes we do, how do they affect the income generated from the cow-calf enterprise? And so if we look at what provides value at the cow-calf operation, we know wean calf crop is extremely important, and wean calf crop is a factor of looking at, well, what was our conception rate? How many calves were actually born? And then how many of those calves actually survived from birth to weaning? And that gives us our wean calf crop of the total cows that we have in our operation. And so that's a very important factor. And if you look at the economists, they'll tell you, look at it, analysis of ranch data, it will tell you that reproductive efficiency of the herd is going to be emphasized the most out of these three factors that are in this box there, year in and year out. Pounds at weaning, certainly important, especially now. We like to mash the scale down as much as we can because of the price or the value of our pounds of calves at weaning today. And so pounds at weaning is important as well into the mix. And then price per pound. That's another important factor that goes into it as well, and what we receive for our calves. And so, you multiply those three factors together, and that gets your income from the cow-calf operation minus those input costs or from your production inputs, and that's going to give you a profit or loss. The key thing to remember is that these simple economic models and what's in the box is going to be different for a ranch maybe in East Texas, east of Interstate 45, that ranch is going to have a little bit different box with respect to, what works in those particular areas versus if we go to, the western portion of the state where it's a more extensive operation. Their production inputs may be a little bit lower from that scenario. Again, their production goals may be different, or practical results out of those productions may be different. So I think those are things that as you implement genetic decisions, you've got to think about, well, what's going to work for my ranch in my particular area with that. And so again, if we look at all three of these factors that go in here, I think we all have to say that they're all important, no doubt. Looking at the price we get for those calves, looking at how many pounds our calves weigh, but also, if you look at it from an emphasis, we always have to focus on and emphasize priority and looking at that weaned calf crop. And I'm going to show you some figures here in just a minute how we change that reproductive efficiency or weaned calf crop percentage, how it can dramatically affect the pounds that we're weaning off of the operation. And then the production inputs. That's something that we continue to have to keep in check as we're making genetic selection decisions or any kind of decisions today, because at times when prices are low and input costs are high, oftentimes we talk about optimizing production. And so we may be trying to minimize our costs as much as possible. But now with calf prices where they are, we may be trying to implement additional inputs into that calf crop, whatever it may be. We may be able to spend more because we are making substantially more from those inputs that we're doing. So I think that's something that you have to think about today, is that we're almost in a scenario where you're maybe wanting to maximize the production, but always, if you're trying to increase production, maybe increase pounds on those calves, look at what it's going to cost you in the short term, but also the long term as well. So I went in and looked at kind of a long-term or kind of a national average price for a 500-pound weaned calf. And we look at it going back all the way from 2016 all the way until where we are currently. And again, this is a national average. Regionally, they're going to be higher and lower, just depends on where you are in the United States. But if we look at a national average for kind of a 500-pound weaned calf, we'll know that, after we kind of got out of that latest peak and high prices came down and we were pretty much flatlined. And I will say that, ranchers were struggling during this period of time because of those lower prices. And at the same time, we saw beginning in 2020, after the pandemic, we saw an increase in those input costs pretty much across the board with that. And so we saw a little bit of a jump in 2022, but here's 2023, 24, and now, as you know, we're in really good calf prices. So that's the first part of this that I want you to see. The second part is I want you to look at pounds of weaned calf per cow exposed. And so pounds of weaned calf per cow exposed is a measure that we use to look at what the productivity of that operation is, okay? And so it's telling us, how many calves that we weaned. So what is our percent calf crop weaned, which is an indication of, again, how many cows were bred, how many were pregnant. When we preg checked, they were pregnant at however many days that may be when you do that in your operation. And then those that survived until calving, those that survived the calving, those that survived from calving all the way to weaning, whether it be, health issues or predators or whatever it may be. And so what the actual weaned calf crop was. So if you've got 100 cows, out of 100 cows, how many calves did you actually wean off of that operation? And so that's where this weaning rate comes into factor there. And then plugging in and looking at average weaning weight of your calf crop. And this is just the actual average weaning weight off the scale at the ranch, or however you sell them. If you market them at the local livestock market, what if you sold 90 calves, what was the average weaning weight on those set of calves there? And so if it's let's just plug in and go over here to the 500-pound average weaning weight. If I've got a 95% calf crop, that means that I'm weaning 475 pounds of calf per cow exposed to the bull. And when I mean per cow exposed to the bull is that how many females that were either bred at AI or by the bull, however you want to do it, but we typically relate it back to exposed to the bull to potentially be bred with that. And you'll notice as we go in and we reduce that weaning rate and we come on down, we go from 475 to 450, 425, 80% we're at 400 pounds, down here to a 70% calf crop. We're at 350 pounds of calf per cow exposed with that. So as you can see, there's a dramatic influence on weaning rate. So how many calves you have to wean, and whether or not you spread that the wean weight out across all of the cows in that operation. And that's important to look at because, the cow that is open that does not have a calf, she still has a maintenance cost or a lost opportunity cost, however you want to look at it with that. And so there's big differences in that. So as you take these differences of weight, and what I did was I charted them out just to look at over the last few years, 10 years or so, what effect this differences in pounds of calf wean per cow exposed do when we put an economic value on there and looking at what the average calf price is for a 500-pound calf in 2016, 17, and so on. So that's our next slide. And so as you'll look at this next slide, you can see that if we kind of rocked along there, 2016, and again, the top one is a 95% calf crop weaned versus the bottom one is all the way down to 70%. Okay. And this is the calf value that we see with that, and that is the value of the pounds of calf weaned there. Okay, when you're looking at the weaned calf crop and pounds of that calf. And so you rock along there, and then as we saw in 2021, we started seeing an increase in prices as our market began to turn, and our supply numbers went down. And one thing that you will notice is that as those prices, calf prices, began to climb rapidly, we also saw an increase in separation between these different percent calf crop, weaned calf crop. And so as you can see, as the price got bigger, those gaps got larger as well. And so if we go back to maybe 2021, before we really saw that jump and increase in calf value there was a difference between, let's just say, an 85% calf crop and a 95% calf crop. I mean, you're looking at somewhere around 75 pounds there, okay, with that. If we come on over to where we are right now and looking at average calf prices with that, we're looking at somewhere around over $200, sorry, over $200, and we're thinking about looking at that differences in value there. If we go from a 70% calf crop, which is the bottom here, that's $1,190, so roughly $1,200, all the way up to the difference going up here to just this 85% calf crop. That's $225 per cow in weaned calf crop value there. So there is some big numbers. So as prices go up, the value of those pounds of calf wean per cow exposed continue to go up as well. So at this time, we're talking about, a lot of money on the table when we're thinking about trying to improve the efficiency of our operation and looking at genetic factors that can influence that as well. So now moving on to economically relevant traits with that. So when we think about economically relevant traits, they're traits that are directly related to revenue or costs, okay? And then the other key factor is selection for these traits will result in some kind of economic value, okay? The key thing is the priorities for these traits will vary depending on the region of the U.S. or the region of the state that you're in, and priorities of these traits may vary from ranch to ranch as well. And some of that is the production system that you have on the ranch, but it's also maybe the marketing practices that you have too. The other important factor is, and we oftentimes forget this in the cattle business, is that, phenotypic traits, and that's traits, phenotypic traits are just traits that are measurable. They're correlated and can result in both positive and negative responsive. So for selection for one trait in the cow herd can maybe positively or negatively affect another trait in that same cow herd. Okay, so, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the genetic selection side. So, if we look at economically relevant traits, as you can see here, there's a lot of them out there. Okay, calving ease, certainly one is important. I always say that a heavy weaning calf is the potential for a heavy weaning calf or high growth calf is of zero value if that calf's not born alive. And so calving ease is extremely important. And so it's both a strong economically relevant trait, but for many of us here in the room, it's also from a convenience trait. We don't like to stay up all night and try to have to deal with calving issues there. So calving ease is certainly one. And, indicators of that, birth weight, gestation length, calving ease score, those are factors that go into EPDs that are calculated that we use for selection. Other economically relevant traits, sale weight, okay, and factors there, weaning direct, weaning weight maternal, yearling weight, 600-day weight, carcass weight, those factors that go into it, and indicators would be these 205-day or 365 yearling weights, slaughter weights. So as we go down the list, cow maintenance feed requirement. Again, we've been talking about high cost, and feed costs have certainly been one of those things that in 10 years have gone up considerably. And factors that affect that, mature cow weight is a direct factor of that. Milk production is another one. So, those are indicators that are important. Stayability, so how the length of time, we talk about what it costs for replacement females today. And we want to extend the life of those as much as possible to recover early on some of those investment. We certainly need to get them to stay around enough to cover what their initial cost was, but the goal is not to cover what it cost us for them, but to generate dollars. So those additional years that we can have them to be productive in the herd, that increases the investment value of them. Heifer pregnancy rate, is a direct indication of what the cost of raising those replacements and developing them, but it's also would be an indication of the long-term fertility of those females as they enter and we move them into the cow herd. Some of our traits that begin to affect the end product: tenderness, marbling score, retail product, days to fin it to the end point, feed requirements that are related to cost of gain, average daily gain, those types of things, survival, disease resistance, vigor, health and disease resistance are important. And then also docility. Sometimes we think of docility as a convenience trait, but it also can be an economically relevant trait as well. When we think about those cattle that really have some temperament issue, there's data out there to show that, they may not perform as well as those that are not complete nuts with that. So those are, there's a lot of economically relevant traits out there and a lot of indicators with that. If you're sitting in the audience now, you're probably thinking, my gosh, that's a lot to think about and a lot that we're trying to select for in the operation, especially in this discussion. We're typically thinking about some, basic kind of selection things. Um, and so if we think about, some of the traits and EPDs, expected progeny differences that we can look at with that, here's some of our economically relevant traits that we have, and here's some of the indicator traits with that. So, but I'm going to take a step further, and I want to skip over to this slide because I think this is going to be probably one of the more important slides that we talk about today. Set your priorities when you're beginning your selection. And if you're starting out in the cattle operation, you got to figure out, well, what are my goals, okay, with this? Am I raising my own replacement females? That changes my selection criteria that I use with that. One thing is, how am I going to sell my calves? Okay, am I selling at weaning or am I selling the carcass? And that selling the carcass could be I'm, weaning my calves and I'm sending them to the feed yard and selling directly to the packer, or it may be I'm feeding out a handful of calves on the ranch and selling them directly to the consumer. So you have to figure out where you are. If you're selling at weaning, factors that are important to you, and again, we've kind of cut this down a little bit. Calving ease is important. Certainly live calves. Weaning weight. Cow maintenance. Stayability is important in the cow herd, so that cow that hangs around the longer time. Heifer pregnancy rate. Survival rate of that calf. And health and disease incidence. If you look at all of these factors, okay, calving ease, cow maintenance is related back to rebreeding rate, okay? Heifer pregnancy rate, survival, disease incidence. Those are all going to directly influence wean calf crop, weaning percentage there. And so again, that was one of the things that we mentioned of those three factors that go into the value of our calf crop. These are going to be influencing them. So if I'm selling at weaning, these are some of the priorities that you have there on the ranch. Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying that we don't select animals that have better marbling, because we know that that's better for the industry as a whole. Production efficiency, those types of things. But if I'm not directly getting paid for those, then they're not going to be as high a priority. Now, when I'm selling them at weaning, and maybe I'm selling them to a buyer that's going to feed them out, next year's price, if those cattle fed out well and graded well and had good carcass quality, there maybe would pay more for the next set of calves. So even though you're selling at weaning, some of these endpoint economically relevant traits still may be important. Okay. So you just have to figure out where am I capturing that value? Now, if I'm selling the carcass, or if I'm getting paid based on what the actual carcass value of those animals are, or what the perceived value of them is at the end, again, calving ease, cow maintenance, stayability, heifer pregnancy rate, survival, health and disease incidence. Those are all important, okay? But also we add to the mix carcass weight, marbling score, yield grade, days to target endpoint, what the feedlot performance is on those cattle. Ultimately, the big grand scheme of things, what will be the cost of gain of those cattle? So you've got a little bit more extensive factors that you're looking at, that you're trying to look at and prioritize how you select for those animals. So you got to set your priorities there when you're trying to do that. Now, The next thing is don't forget genetic correlations. Okay. And there's a lot going on with this slide. All right. But I'm going to kind of do it, look at the graphic first. And, you know, if we've got A here, two different traits that are not correlated, there's no interaction among those, either positive or negative. The second one is there is small genetic correlation. So again, you can see the overlap that we see here. There's little influence, some influence on trait 2 over trait 1 and trait 1 over trait 2. And then finally, you can see there's a large amount of genetic correlation in this last example there. And so as we look at those and we look at these two charts here, our graphs here, excuse me, you can see if we're looking at trait 2 versus trait 1, there's a positive correlation there. So as we increase whatever, let's just say, for example, as I increase weaning weight on my calves, I would also expect birth weight to potentially increase as well on that. Now, depending on the bull, this positive genetic influence can be steeper or it can be flatter there, that curve. And then if it's a negative, all right, as we increase milk in the cow herd, and if we look at it on positive side, if we increase milk, we will increase the maintenance energy cost. So what it costs us to feed those. On the flip side, we could be influencing, as we increase milk, we could be negatively influencing reproduction there if we're not meeting the energy needs of that. And so those are some scenarios that we look at. And so again, don't forget those genetic correlations as we begin you begin your selections, because sometimes we get hung up on single trait selection and we're kind of shooting for that one particular target, but we have to be very careful of, you know, what we're looking, what some of the ramifications for that can be. It's just like, you know, if we're just strictly selecting for weaning and yearling weight, increasing that, but we're also simultaneously keeping our replacement females. Over time, you're going to, if you're increasing weaning weight and yearling weight, you're increasing mature size, and you will begin to influence the mature size of those replacement females that are coming back into the herd. So over time, you can increase the cow herd size, which may be good or bad, depending on the situation that you're in. So again, don't forget those genetic correlations there. So just some different traits, genetic correlations there, positive, you know, milk production and energy intake. You know, as fat thickness increases, we would expect yield grade to increase there. As carcass weight increases, on average, we would expect birth weight to increase too with that. Negative side, you know, there's birth weight. An increase in birth weight will negatively affect direct calving ease there, okay, or make them less of a calving ease animal there. Again, uncorrelated age at puberty as compared to retail product, there's really not a factor there. So again, there's a lot of different traits that are correlated with one another and at different levels there. So just have to be careful as you begin to make these selection decisions to look at it. Okay. Another thing that when we're looking at genetic selection is understanding heritability too. And heritability is essentially as we make selection or genetic selection for a particular trait, how rapidly or quickly will that trait respond to our selection pressure? Okay. So for example, mature weight has a very high heritability. So if I breed if I've got a herd that is very small, mature cow side, and it has a small weaning weight average, if I breed them to a bigger, growthier bull with a higher growth potential, I can typically make a lot of change fairly rapidly there. Okay. Um, Birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight are typically medium heritability. On low heritability, meaning it takes many generations to make progress, there is maternal ability, reproduction, health or vigor, cow longevity, overall cow productivity. Those are low in heritability. So it takes longer period and more generations to really make a big change there with that. Now, the interesting thing is these factors also are big influencers of weaned calf crop there. So our fertility rate within the herd. So one of the most important factors at the cow-calf level, which is fertility and survivability of those calves, is also the lowest inheritability or the biggest challenge from a genetic selection. And so that's where we have to look at this other factor on the other side is the level of heterosis or hybrid vigor. And with that, that is the crossbreeding effect that goes into it. And so if you look at these traits in high inheritability are typically lower in heterosis levels. Traits that are low in heritability respond to crossbreeding. Okay, so let's define that a little bit when we're looking at that. And so again, this goes into crossbreeding and those types of things. And we won't get to go into deep dive into that, but utilizing multiple breeds from a breed complementarity, but also this concept of hybrid vigor or the improvement in performance of what you would expect over the two purebreds there that were used in this mating decision there. So heterosis or hybrid vigor is another genetic thing that we've got to look at that you keep into check there. Just wanted to show you this, and again, another convenience trait here that we look for. And this is some data from GenX, and they looked at calving ease EPD, all right, which is a very good indicator when we're selecting bulls to maybe put on heifers or just in the cow herd too. You always want to keep calving ease in check. And so when we look at calving ease, so a higher number EPD on calving ease is more desirable than a lower calving ease there, okay? And so as we look at that and we go from a percent assisted, okay, and bulls that were lower on the calving ease score, not as desirable, you were at 17% assisted versus those out of calving ease bulls, we were at about 1%. Okay, so that's a convenience trait for sure. And that was out of Angus females there. But also, from the standpoint, you have to look at it as a trait with an economic value too, or economically relevant trait, because we know that we're not going to be able to catch all of those calving problems there. And you're going to end up losing some calves because of that, and potentially losing females as well, cows or heifers on that too. So again, just another example of an economically relevant trait and the impact selection can have on that, in either improving the productivity or value of the calf crop there. Next thing I want to throw out, and again, this is some low-hanging fruit when we're thinking about genetic selection here. Is a bull an expense or an investment? Okay, so do I treat a bull as an expense or an investment? The first thing is, and I'm just like everybody else, you don't like spending the money on a bull, for sure, with that, because they do cost a lot, and they're pretty expensive right now, with that. The positive note is there is a pretty good salvage value. If you've got a bull that you need to trade in and sell, there is a pretty big salvage value. But we have seen bull prices have certainly increased as our calf prices have increased as well. So, technically, yeah, the bull is an expense, but let's look at it a different way there. And so, let's just say we've got an example of this Brayford calf, Brahman Hereford calf, came out of a Brahman bull on a set of Hereford cows. Okay. And so that calf, essentially, roughly, half of that calf's genetics came from the cow and half from the bull there. Okay. So 50-50 from mama, 50% from the daddy. Okay. Pretty simple. Now, theoretically, let's just say we've got 25 cows and we value those at $3,000, okay, which in today's market, that may be just a little bit low potentially, but let's just say that's $3,000 a cow, 25 cows, that's $75,000. So the next question is, well, how much do I spend or invest in my bull to put on those 25 cows, assuming that half of my genetics come from the bull and half from the cow? Well, if you do the simple math, it's $75,000 that we spend on the bull. So if there's any purebred producers in the audience today, they're probably smiling and saying, Dr. Clear is saying, we need to spend a lot more money on the bull. In reality, we all know that money doesn't grow on trees. And I'm not saying go out and spend $75,000 on a bull to put on a commercial set of cows there, okay? Because that is not feasible there, okay? But what I'm saying is, think about a bull as half the genetics of the calf crop. And we can maybe spend a little bit more money on that bull because he's going to influence half of every calf in that calf crop. And if you had a 100% calf crop, that's 25 calves there, okay? And so he can have a big impact. And if I can increase my weaning weight or whatever trait that I'm selecting for out of that bull, selecting that one bull is going to have a bigger impact versus me selecting, trying to improve 1 or 2 cows every year in my cow herd there. And so again, I'm not saying spend $75,000 on a bull. That's not feasible for a commercial operation. But I want to show you this particular slide here. And this is a spreadsheet I developed about a little over 20 years ago that I use and I update year after year. And what I try to do with it is to show the impact of the bull has on a calf crop, okay, and economics there. And so within there, here's some herd data. Let's just say our herds were averaging 450 pounds of weaning weight. That's actual weaning weight. Typically, my bull stays around. I can use him for 5 years. So he's roughly 7 years of age when I cull him. Bull loss, it'd be nice that if we were guaranteed when we bought a bull, if it would last 5 calving seasons, all right, or 5 breeding seasons there. But we know that we're going to lose some. Now, if your bull loss is higher than 10%, you can plug that number in and it's going to increase, change these values here. I plugged in interest rate just like you borrowed the money on that bull kind of plugged in where we are, kind of a similar cow loan rates. 25 cows per bull. And let's just assume I was in an 85% calf crop. That was my wean calf crop. There's your interest cost over the lifetime of that bull because your money would be tied up during that time. Preliminary bull cost, there's your 10% loss that you've got to plug into that. Salvage value, right now, the trade-in value on a bull is pretty good. So there's a lot of salvage value. So here's your total bull cost, and this is genetic cost. This is not, doesn't include feeding. We're going to assume that a lower quality bull is going to be kind of the similar feed maintenance costs that are higher quality. Okay, there could be a little bit of difference, but it's not worth plugging into the mix there. So as you can see, total bull cost between a cheaper bull, $4,000 bull versus a $9,000 bull, there's a little bit of difference between those two. Okay, about $7,500 there. This would be the calf sold during that 5 years of time. There's my cost per calf sired. So when you get up to that, move into that $9,000 bulls, you got $100 per calf in bull cost there. Okay. The difference in cost between these bulls, okay, as you can see, the difference between $4,000 to $6,000, there's about a $28 difference there per calf. That's the pounds of additional weaning weight that would be necessary to pay for, offset that in today's calf market. And then let's just say, okay, well, I'm expecting 20 more pounds of calf from bull B versus that bull A. That's why I paid a little bit more for that particular bull. Okay. And looking at the value of that additional pounds today, all right, you're at about $2,900 there. We move over. Let's just say I'm going to spend a little bit more money on a bull that's going to give me a little more pounds, but maybe a little bit better quality calves out of those for whatever factor. Okay. But I'm going to get 5 cents a pound more for my calves. Now we're looking at $8,400 over the lifetime of that bull. And if we spend that $9,000, get a little bit of premium on our calf, a few more pounds. So the dollars today, because of the calf market that we're in, can be very significant. And so a bull is an investment there. Okay. I will say that also a bull is a risk too, as we all know. There is a risk that bulls may not last that entire time. And it also seems like a higher value bull, or the more you pay for a bull, the increased chance that he's going to do something stupid to either end his life or reduce the length of his life and before we have to sell him. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. So that's just a little bit of discussion on the heterosis or hybrid vigor, and we talked about it as we begin to wrap up today's discussion with that. Again, talking about the crossbreeding effect in these cows and things that we covered there a little bit already. Let's see. In summary, economically important traits, should always be priority, especially in today's cattle market with high cattle prices as well as our input costs. Prioritize which ones are important to your operation. Use genetic selection for these traits, and also be looking for correlations that could be positive or negative. And then take advantage of heterosis and traits that are lower in heritability, and take advantage of that crossbreeding effect in your commercial operation. The last thing I have, there's my email address that you can email me if you've got some direct questions. But also I invite you out to our Texas A&M Beef Cattle Short Course. It's August 4th through 6th. You can get that QR code right there. You can scan that, or just beefcattleshortcourse.com. We have additional information. We'll have about 1,800 to 2,000 people there. We've got a very large trade show, and we'll have roughly about 25 different concurrent sessions that go on, anything from hands-on stuff to some of the most advanced technology. So whether you're a large or small operation, producer's been in the business 1 year versus 50 years. There's some opportunities, and that's on the campus of Texas A&M University. So we invite you out to attend that. We always appreciate TSCRA's partnership on that. They work with us and have for many years, helping us with that event too. And so, Brent, I'm going to turn it over to you if there's any questions.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Dr. Clear. Yes, at this time, if you have any questions, we'll give everyone a minute or two to get those typed in the chat box or the Q&A box below, and we'll get those answered. Okay, we have a few questions for you.
Okay.
First one, you talked about bull genetic. Uh, yes, you talked about bull genetics. What about cow genetics?
Yeah, and the cow is certainly equally important on the selection side of things. And we can, when we're selecting for those females and the genetic side, we talked about the big picture economically relevant traits, but I think you also, when you're selecting those, you kind of have to look at the other phenotypic considerations on those. And those are the visual traits that we look at would be, feet and legs, structural issues, the amount of muscle and bone, pin width, all of those factors go into the female side as well. So they are equally important. I chose to just highlight the bull side today because that bull has such a big direct impact, because one animal is going to influence potentially 25 or 30 calves out of that particular cow herd.
Okay, next question. Where can we obtain a copy of the Beef Sire Selection Manual, 3rd edition?
Yeah, what I can do is, Bran, I guess I will, what I can share that with you, that link, and give that to you. And then Bran, I guess you'll email it out to who else got it.
Yeah, sure.
And I
Absolutely.
don't mind, I can share my slides as well, with you. But that's a really handy manual that came out a couple of years ago. So, but I'll be sure to share my slides as well as that link to that manual.
Yes, and just as a heads up for everyone in attendance today, you will receive the recording via Zoom in about 48 hours. We upload it on our YouTube channel, and then if you would like to request the slides, please email education@tscarray.org, and I'm happy to send those over to you. If you have any more questions, you can also email them, and we will make sure that we get them answered for you if you don't ask them today. We have another question. In a Brangus cow herd, what traits should I be looking for in a bull specific to that herd?
Well, the first question, I always ask in that scenario, and I'm assuming if you're using Brangus, you're probably retaining replacement females out of there. So, or you may be marketing those replacement females in addition to the steers off of that operation. And so, if I'm a Brangus commercial cow calf operation, I'm looking at those economic. I'm looking at weaning weight, yearling weight. So I'm trying to look at the growth, definitely looking at calving ease there, as well as depending on my end product. If I'm marketing those calves based on what their potential meat quality is, yeah, I'm looking at marbling there. But then I'm also looking at stayability, heifer pregnancy, those fertility traits that go along with it as well. The challenge is if you're raising your own replacements out of that cow herd, most of the time you're probably moderating where you are. You're kind of shooting in the middle because you have to look at fertility in those types of traits. You'd like to maximize pounds at weaning because pounds of beef helps pay the bills. But I know that if I continue to select for heavier weaning and yearling weights, I'm going to also increase my mature weights. And so I may not be able to continue to do that and then keep my own replacement females out of there. So it's again, it's your targets are what you're selecting for, and you kind of have to work with. Now, if I'm just selling all my calves at weaning, and I'm not maybe in replacement market or my raising my own replacements, I'm going to emphasize growth and performance in those calves.
If you have a small operation, less than 8 cows, is there some criteria to determine if you buy a bull or go the AI route and pay someone to do that for you?
Yeah, that that's the small operation is kind of the challenge there with the bull. And bulls, if one, they're expensive, okay? And so let's just say, for example, in that scenario that I showed you, this particular slide, let me get back to that. That'll be a good slide to show you. If you go in there and look at, let's just say instead of that 25 cows, you have 8 cows. So you got a third less with that. And so, if I look at that, my cost per calf sired is going to be about $75 with my bull versus this $23. So you could look at it that way is I'm going to have roughly $75 per calf in the genetics, plus probably $300 or $400 in maintenance cost in there. So you got to factor that in. So you could feasibly, with just one bull, you could have well over $100 a calf per year just in your bull costs there. And so you have to look at that. And then, so now the next question is, well, how much does it cost me to AI? And in today's time, setting up a set of cows, you're probably looking at somewhere roughly with synchronization protocols, probably around $15 to $16 in the product, the synchronization drugs, plus the time and effort to run them through the chute, which is really 3 times when you include the artificial insemination time into that, plus your technician, it's probably $25 or more per head there. So you're roughly, plus you have the semen, another $20. So, on that one synchronization, you're probably looking at, let's just say roughly 20 plus 25, that's 45 plus another 20, $65 there for that. Again, you have to assume that, I'm probably not going to be at 85% conception rate on average, if all things good. So then you figure out, well, what that average conception rate on the AI is. So I think you have to look at those factors, make that cost comparison, and then decide whether or not it's going to work with you. That AI technician, I would say, is probably not 85%, conception rate the first time he AIs those cows or she AIs them. You're going to have some that come back in. And so, they will have to be rebred as well. So you have to factor in all those time and efforts that go into it too. So,
Last question.
okay.
Given the selection of good, better, best bull, in the absence of any phenotypical flaws, how do you tell from looking at the individual bull and his genetics and genomics? How do you tell what the bull is going to produce? In other words, the best looking bull may not be the best producer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's a good question. And that's where, I really, Brandon, I love sorting cattle. I enjoy sorting commercial females. And I love sorting through bulls. And it's fun looking at them and trying to find the best one. But I've also selected the best bull or the best looking set of females, and they're not necessarily the most productive out of that deal. So that's where, when we're making a selection on a bull, I'm going to go in and typically the way I do it is I like to look at the data first. I'll look at those EPDs because those are going to be some of the most accurate portion. And again, they're going to include actual data, performance data, ancestral data, but also genomics data into that mix as well. And so I'm going to look at those and begin to select those traits. Maybe it's calving ease direct. I already showed you an example of how we can select for calving ease and reduce the chances that we're going to have assisted birth. So I'll use that data. That makes my first cut on my bulls, and then I decide which bulls phenotypically, meaning looking at them, those traits, fit into the mold that I'm looking for there with that.
Good deal. Well, it appears we are out of time today. We wanted to thank everyone who joined us for today's Ranching 101 webinar. We hope everyone has a great afternoon and look forward to seeing you all on May 20th for the next Ranching 101 webinar, Heifer Retention, Keep versus Cull. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Clear.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.